So what are the best decks going into 2021? Well, the first one is, you guessed it, Evolved Shaman. Evolved Shaman has a lot of things going for it right now. The first one is its consistency. The fact that you have the Cage Match Custodian, which allows you to draw the Bogspine Knuckles extra efficiently, which means every 7.5 cards, you should get a Cage Match Custodian or a Bogspine Knuckles. When you combine that with a full mulligan on the very first turn in order to look for it, you're going to be getting the Knuckles, the weapons, very consistently. Not to mention the fact that you have 2 Loot Hoarders to bring them back after you've played the first one, which just increases your odds to Power Spike. You also have the Mogu Flesh Shaper, which is a great way to cheese out a minion, get some removal with the Rush, and then make it a 10 drop. You also have Revolve to get rid of Rogue and Paladin matchups that spend a lot of time pumping their minions, and honestly, this deck is just really good. It has really good swing turns, decent early and mid game because you do have a couple of early game cards like the Sludge Slurper, like a Tour Guide to get a Totem out early, and a couple of other drops. And yeah, this deck basically goes from like okay early to like insane mid game, but there are a couple of downsides to this deck. And the 2 downsides that I can see is 1, it does run out of steam fairly quickly, and 2, everybody's teching to beat it. People are starting to go a little bit more aggressive to try to beat Evolved Shaman fast. People are getting more control decks, so that way they can deal with their wide boards more consistently. A lot of the time it's still not enough, but it's out there. And also, the Kobold Sticky Finger is a way that people are trying to counter this deck. So, this deck is still a safe craft, and it's super duper cheap. In fact, instead of the Fireheart Instructor Fireheart, you could put in a Serpentine Portal. It's definitely not as good, but it is a 3-drop that gets a minion out on the board and can do some damage. It's decent if you don't have the Legendary. This deck is cheap, so it's still worth the craft. Just understand that as the meta develops, this deck may fall or it may receive some nerfs. So I just want to throw this stuff out there right now. So you guys, if you do craft it, you're not super upset if the meta shifts a little bit in the next couple of weeks, especially with the new mini expansion coming out at some point, which could change the meta even more. The next one is Miracle Rogue, or World Kick Rogue, or Combo Rogue, whatever you want to call it. Basically, this deck is number 2, and the only reason it's behind Evolved Shaman is because it's harder to play. Personally, I like this deck more. I think it's more fun to play, it's more dynamic, there are more decisions you have to make, and if you make more right decisions, I think this deck has the potential to have a higher win rate than Evolved Shaman, because you can generate a ton of value, you can go super hard early game, you can develop a more mid-game approach with the Questing Adventurer. It doesn't have as much counterplay with things like weapon removal shutting the entire deck down. You have good late game by being able to play Secret Passage and generate a ton more resources just like that. You get lackeys. Honestly, this deck can do a lot of things, and because of how versatile it is, it definitely deserves to be the number 2. It's also relatively cheap with only 2 legendaries. And so it's not going to break the deck to make this break the bank to make this deck. And I don't think this one's as likely to be nerfed because it's so skill heavy, which means that it might be a little bit of a safer craft, but I'm not sure. I still think Evolved Shaman is better right now, but we'll see what happens in the next week or 2. So this one is a little bit surprising to me, but Zoo Warlock has been absolutely destroying the ladder, at least for me, and let me explain why. Like I said, Evolved Shaman's biggest weakness was the fact that you can't deal with early game aggressive decks. Zoo is very early aggressive. Zoo is a kind of deck that loses to other aggro decks because you deal damage to yourself. Aggro isn't seen as much anymore. Rogue is not able to do well against wide boards. Zoo Warlock is one of the best at making giant wide boards, and in fact, one extra thing I threw in here was the Minari Mosher to heal up a little bit because a lot of your minions are demons. So even if you are getting a little bit rushed down by something like an Evolved Shaman or an aggro deck because they just had some really good stuff in the earlier mid game, you can come back a little bit with a card like this. You can take it out for Soulfire, by the way. I just personally like this card, but if you want to run Soulfire, it honestly is just as good, if not better, for finishing off your opponent. But basically, this deck has exactly what it takes to beat the 2 best, most popular decks in the meta right now. Just for reference, I've played about 20 games, and I think 12 of them have been against Shaman or Rogue. 60% of my game have been against these 2 classes, and Zoo Warlock is, in my opinion, in the best position to beat both of them. So because of that, I think it is the number 3 spot. I don't think it's as strong inherently, but based on the meta right now, I think it's going to be absolutely incredible. So Bomb Warrior is a deck that I didn't really like that much going into this, and for 2 reasons. 1, I thought that it would struggle against the meta, and 2, I thought that it would get hurt by all of the weapon tech people have in to beat Shaman. Well, the first thing is it actually does well into both of the matchups, Rogue and Evolved Shaman, from what I've seen, because you can wipe their big boards, especially if they cheese it out with things like Brawl and Bladestorm. Minefield being able to wipe the early board has changed this deck completely. Like, before you'd lose to like an early developed board that just like snowballs on itself, now Minefield resets the board a lot of the time. You have a little bit more time to set up your weapon, and then you just win. And the next thing is the weapon tech, which is fair, but not everybody runs it. Most of the decks are Shaman and Rogue, which people are trying to tech against, so they're not running these tech cards to beat you anyway. Like I said, 60% of my games are against Shaman and Rogue. They're not running things like Acidic Swamp Ooze and Cobalt Sticky Finger, so you're not actually in that much trouble in most of the matchups. Honestly, this deck has proven to be very, very good, in my opinion. It has into aggro matchups a little bit more early game responses, and into the slower matchups, you have more time to put bombs into their deck and close out with Blastmaster Boom or Galakron, and into the mid-range decks, you have the removal. Honestly, I think this deck has the potential to be good, really good, but because I haven't played it as much as Zoolock yet, I have put it below Zoolock. But I do think that this has a lot of potential, but it is expensive as well. So if you want to try it out, go ahead. If you don't because you think it'll cycle out soon, that's fair too. So the next deck is Libroom Paladin, and first of all, I would just like to say there are a couple of different ways you can build the deck. I know that some people don't like the Hammer of Naru. Personally, I like having one. But if you're playing against a lot of Shamans and Warriors, you could take it out and put in a Cobalt Sticky Fingers to beat it, and it would be at least okay. Or you could take it out and put in a Loot Hoarder if you're playing against more Rogues and need a little bit more early game and draw. But personally, I like Hammer of Naru because I like having a 6-drop 6/6 and then getting a weapon. But again, it is up to you. Also, it's an epic, so if you don't have the dust, easily replaceable. But I think that this deck has the most potential of the, like, not super OP decks, because I think that the Evolved Shaman and Miracle Rogue are the OP decks. The next two are good at beating the OP decks. I think that they're good at doing that. Libroom Paladin is a pretty good, solid, all-around deck that's fairly skill-dependent, and if you learn how to play it, learn some combos, learn to get the most damage out of Penflingers, learn to when to use removal, tweak the deck a little bit for your own personal preference, I think it has the most potential of a lot of the decks out there. The deck is both linear, but also like kind of complex in the way that it's played, because you know what you want to do, but there are still a lot of ways to actually end up doing that, and combos you can use with Penflingers. So overall, I think that the deck is quite fun. I think it's good. I would recommend it if you don't want to play something ridiculously broken but still want to have a good time and win games, and I think Libroom Paladin is probably one of the best decks to do that with. Again, if you don't have like Avenging Wrath or Hammer of Naru because they're epics, replace it with the Sticky Finger, unless you don't have it because it's also an epic, or Loot Hoarder for some extra draw. And it also comes down to personal preference at some point, but Avenging Wrath with a Libroom of Justice a lot of the time can be a really, really good board wipe and push a little bit of damage, so I personally like the combo, but it's up to you. The last one is kind of my dark horse that I think could be really, really strong, especially based on what I've seen from it. And let me just tell you right now, Highlander Demon Hunter seems to be a really good deck for a couple of reasons. One, Cycle of Hatred can absolutely decimate rogues. They have a huge board of little lackeys. You play Cycle of Hatred, you kill them all, you get a whole board of 3/3s. You also have Coilfang Warlord, an 8-mana 9/5 rush to kill off a lot of big minions and leave you with a minion. Obviously, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza and Zephyrus are good late game too. You got the weapon tech, you got Cobalt Sticky Fingers, you got Acidic Swamp Ooze, and again, you got Zephyrus to deal with those. You got some Lifesteal with the Warblades and Eye-Beam to deal with, aggro decks. You have Consume Magic and Mage Hunter in order to deal with things like Edwin or Questing Adventurer early. You have Penflinger to push damage late game. You don't necessarily need Altruis, but I like him as well because you do have a lot of cheap cards that you can play at the end of the game to push damage. Zai being able to duplicate something like Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, or just something good in general, like another weapon, so you could have 2/4/3 weapons, or another Warblade, or copy Zephyrus, or whatever, can just be very versatile. You don't necessarily need to run Zai. In fact, if you don't have him, I wouldn't recommend crafting him for this. Like, he's not that strong, but he actually has proven to be quite good, and if you want to take him out, you could probably put in an extra draw card, like the Crimson Sigil Runner, or a Demon or Demonic Companion, or something along those lines to give you a little bit of extra push early game, so that way you don't die as often. But overall, I think this deck has the most potential of the decks nobody talks about, and I like having these kind of like dark horse decks thrown in the mix. So do what you want with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.